Hi, a very warm welcome to Dusty Shelf. I do hope I find you well. Today we're talking about the advanced passenger train and specifically Hornby's version of the APT. So obviously I know Rapido have brought out a version of the APTE. That's for another video on another day, but today we're just talking about the Hornby versions. I have a few of them in my collection, and I'm just going to talk through a little bit about the models, a little bit around the history. So I'll start off by giving you an introduction as to why I'm so fascinated in the APT. Then we'll talk about these two, which are from the 1980s, and then we'll go on to this one from 2022 and then compare the two together. So what's the difference, you know, what improvements have been made in the last 40 odd years, and then finally I've got a little bit of memorabilia that I've collected over the years that I'll share with you. Well, I'm not proposing to go into too much detail about the actual APT itself, but I'll just give a little bit of background. I'm sure everybody watching this channel is fully aware of what the APT was. But basically, this was a prototype train built for British Rail, built at the Derby Works, and was first unveiled to the public in 1978. And the thing about it is the mechanism inside allowed the train to tilt as it went into corners. And it was this tilting mechanism that allowed it to travel at slightly higher speed on the existing rails. Now, it carried on testing right through until 1986. There is a story that the train was full of journalists and travelling at high speed with the tilt mechanism gave people travel sickness, and because of that it was scrapped. I don't know if that was the full reason. I think it was just running over budget. It was a government project, and yeah, things just didn't go the right way for it. But the technology that was sort of pioneered by this train now runs forward into our current trains. For example, the Virgin train's Pendolino, which also tilts into the curves. And to think what could have been had this seen its way into full production. As it was, obviously the shape here is very, very similar to the Intercity 125, and the sort of tilting mechanism was scrapped and they moved forward with the Intercity 125. So there were 3 complete trains built of the APTE, also known as the Class 370. I don't think I said that earlier. 2 of them were scrapped. One of them found its way into preservation, and that's the one that is at Crewe Heritage Centre. So it's a full 7-car set that they've got up there, and it's a complete train. There is the APTE, which also was saved from being scrapped. That was the experimental version of the loco, and that's now in the National Railway Museum stored at the Shildon site. Now, why have I got such a fascination with the APT? Well, there's 2 things. First of all, when I cast back my mind back to my childhood, round the top of my bedroom when I lived at my parents', I had the poster from Rail Riders. It was like a long frieze of sort of depicting the railways as they went from sort of the pioneering days right the way through all the locos, and then right at the end, at the right hand side, was the APT, which was the height of technology in the early 80s. Now, I have done a video on Rail Riders. If you're not aware, it was a club. Well, it still is a club. I mean, it's still running today. But back in the day, any a schoolboy who's interested in trains was a member of the Rail Riders, and used to go around to all the different attractions and get little stickers that you could then put on this frieze to show where you'd been and what you visited. I have done a video, as I say, on Rail Riders. If you want to check that out, gives a bit of background, and yeah, obviously if you do remember it, it might be worth watching and see if you remember the frieze and the stickers. There is another little story that my friend Dan, who's a childhood friend, he lives over in the States now, but his parents lived not too far away, and we were playing one afternoon, and we went down to his shed, which is about halfway down the garden, and inside the shed was his model railway, and I'm sure there was an APT going round on the layout there. Now, probably was an Intercity 125, but in my memory it was this APT running round on the track. Now, it was a loco that I always wanted. In my bedroom, as I say, I had the frieze at the top of the room. My bed was on one side, and down the other side I had my model railway, all running down one wall. But I never got an APT to run on it. So these APTs that you see here, I've actually acquired these in later life as I became a collector of Hornby railways, and yeah, they've formed part of the collection, and yeah, I finally got APTs to run and look at. So if you watch the channel, you'll be aware that last year I managed to get to Crewe. Now, I've been to Crewe a few times, and I'd seen the APTP that's preserved there from outside of the yard several times. I used to work close to the area, and I'd always wanted to go in and visit it. Well, last year we were on holiday, and we were fairly close to the APT, so I took a morning out and went over there, and the Heritage Centre was open. I managed to get to walk around the Heritage Centre, which was wonderful, but I managed to achieve a sort of lifelong ambition, if you like, which was to actually go on board the APT. And what was wonderful about it is, as I walked down through, obviously all the smells and nostalgia, lots of information in there, but the lead car, they'd actually tilted to one side, so you could walk down inside with the car tilted over. So the one thing I've still got to do on my bucket list is to actually see the thing move under its own power. Now, I believe it can do that, and yeah, hopefully one day, if I can get there in the summer months when there's plenty to see there, maybe they'll be operating the hydraulics, and yeah, I'll get to see the APT tilting from one side to the other. Well, Hornby's first APT came out in 1980, and as you can see here, this is a version from 1980. Only came as a train set. You couldn't buy it as a train pack. And in the train set, you'd get two of these driving cars, two of the trailer cars that you see here, an APT power car, large oval of track with a controller, and then there was also the elusive card tunnel. I say elusive because I've not managed to get one of those. I wanted to get my sets complete, and both the sets I have as a train set, they don't have the card tunnel in there, but yeah, originally did come with a card tunnel and some booklets. The individual carriages were quite specific in the packs, in that they're all numbered individually. You can see the different numbers on here, and these correspond to the you know, the trains that were built as the prototypes. So what we have here, we've got the driving car, which is a driver trailer second, known as a DTS, and this was number 48101 at one end. We then have the trailer brake first, the TBF, and this at this end of the train was 48601. Then in the middle, the non-driving motor at the MDM, and that was 49003, as you can see here. And then at the other end of the train, we've got the TBF, which was a 48602, and then again another DTS, which was a 48102. Now, also included in the train pack was the very sought-after pantograph. Now, I've seen these sell for ridiculous amounts of money on their own. They are quite a nice little mechanism, but this would fit on top of your trailer as so, and obviously would rotate as it went round the track. Didn't mention earlier, all of the carriages with their little mechanisms inside allow the carriages to tilt left to right as it's going around the bends, with this sort of, I don't know if it's showing up on the camera, let me just check that that's showing. You can see sort of a ramp on the bottom there, so as this goes round it tilts the car. So all of the carriages would tilt as it was going round on your track. Now, back in 1980, this set, complete with the track controller, as I say, the cardboard tunnel and the rest of the train, would cost you the grand total of £67.95. And adjusted for inflation, that's £279.95. So not too dissimilar to the current APT, but we'll come on to that later because it has gone up a little bit in price. Now, one of the interesting things I found out that I didn't know whilst researching this video is these were actually moulded in clear plastic and then sprayed on the outside. Reason being to get the windows flush. And indeed, if I look through, it won't show up on the camera, but when I look through, I can see the light just shining through the paintwork on the far side. So yeah, moulded in plastic, and yeah, to get the flushness of the windows. And talking of windows, I just want to point out, this is a 1980s version. What you'll see here, you've got a yellow surround around the front windows. Now, if I bring in the 1981 version and show you the two cabs side by side, you can see now that we've got the black surround of the window, Intercity APT marked on the front there. But other than that, no other differences at all to the moulding, to the painting. But for some reason, and I'm sure somebody out there will know, they changed the livery on the cab from this rather neat surrounding window, has now become completely blacked out, and we've now got an Intercity APT written across the nose of the loco. And this is the livery that it would go forward with for the next 4 or 5 years. And yeah, other than that, the sets were exactly the same. The train sets were the same. I don't believe there was any differences made to the power cars or the trailer cars. It was only this window surround. And as a Hornby collector, it's great to have both versions. I think very interesting. So the black cab version would continue from 1981 right through to 1985, and this was released in both train packs and train sets. Now the train set was R543, carrying on the same number as the 1980s version, and then the train pack was R794. There was also a couple of mail order sets, a treasure chest set, which I'm struggling to find anything about, and quite intriguingly, a Libyan set, which, yeah, again, I can't find a great deal out about those, so maybe if somebody's got any information, they can share that. Well, I've shown you the two variants here of the from the 1980s. We've got the one with the yellow surround window. This was in production for 1 year. We've got the one with the black surround window in production for 4 years. So which do you think is less common? Well, it's actually the one that was in production for 4 years. So in 1980, 14,000 units were produced, and yeah, all sold as train sets. And then following 4 or 5 years, the train packs and train sets probably sold a total of 10,000. So this one is actually the less common of the two models. If you can call them common or not common or rare, I don't know, because I mean, when we're talking in, you know, quantities of 14,000 and 10,000, you know, 24,000 units, they're not a particularly uncommon model by any stretch of the imagination. But it is indeed the black cab that has less examples out there, let's say. Well, on the track here we have the yellow cab version from 1980. I will say it wasn't a great runner when it came out of the box. It obviously been stored for a long time, so I have given it a service. It's had an oil. I've cleaned the armature, cleaned the wheels off. I haven't put new traction tyres on it, and that's half the problem with what I'm about to show you. Now my railway is on a very slight incline, so it's climbing towards the right on the screen. So let's just go for climbing uphill. I mean, we're talking, you know, maybe half a degree. It's not much, but you can hear and see the wheel slip as it's grabbing for traction. It's really struggling. Going back downhill, a lot smoother, and you'll note that the lights are out on the trailing cab. I thought they went to red, but on this one they're only directional lights, so when going forward the lights come on, you see there, and at the other end of the train they would be off, and then coming back the other way. So no interior lights at all, no cab lights, just the direction lights on the front of the train. And it's sticking again. Let's give it another look. Now I will say, I've tried to take this around the layout several times, and it is very temperamental. Let me just move the camera angle. I'm going to send this around the layout, and I'll be very surprised if it doesn't derail. I mean, my track's not very good, but it's very difficult to get this one to come all the way round without, there we go. Yeah, at least one set of wheels coming off, in fact 2 sets on that run. Yeah, very temperamental. And I think half of it is it could do with a little bit more weight, but also probably my radius is a little bit tight. So yeah, not the best experience running this, I'm afraid. Yeah, I think possibly the radius is a bit too tight, and there's a set of points on that corner. But let's send it round again, you never know. The problem with this one is if I try and go slow, there's not enough momentum to clear the curves. And if I go too fast, it's just straight off the track. Really difficult. Oh, one set of wheels off. Yeah, it seems to be always the same area, same set of wheels. But anyway, I've got some footage of it actually going round, so I'll put that in, and yeah, we'll move on to the newer version and see how that copes with the track. Now, jumping forward a good few years, we find ourselves at 2020, and Hornby, during their 100th anniversary celebrations, where they brought out the rocket, also retooled and brought out the APT. Initially sold in 2 sets. There was the 5-car set and also a 7-car set. The 5-car set had slightly different allocation numbers for the cars in the set. So we had a DTS of 48103, a TBF of 48603, an NDM of 49003, and then the other end of the train, again a TBF 48604, and then the DTS, which was the 48104. And then there was a 7-car pack. I won't go through the numbers on each of the bits of stock. I've done that a couple of times now. You get the gist. But including in that pack was the Intercity XTS development vehicle, which when looked inside, you could see all the sort of computer banking and various things that were modelled inside the carriage. Now, back in 2020, I bought the 7-car set. It was extremely expensive. I'm just looking up here, £586 it was. Back in 2020, and yeah, I managed to get a little bit of a deal on it, but I have to say, in all my times of buying railways, it's the only train I've ever sent back. And basically, out of the box, I felt when I looked at it, the packaging was awful, and we'll go through that in a moment, because it's the latest release. They've used the same packaging, and it's just that horrible cardboard, cheap cardboard model, and I felt that was wrong for a nearly £600 train. Well, just to elaborate on my complaint about the packaging, so £477 set, and in fact the one I bought was more than that. It was £580, so nearly a £600 set. And when I pulled open the box, now most of the train's still on the track, so you have to forgive me, this is literally just the packaging. In here, this is the first layer. You can see the blister pack here, which would have the motorised component, but then the rest of it is just held in these cardboard bits and pieces. And I felt for a £600 train, that as packaging is absolutely ridiculous. Now thankfully Hornby, more recent releases, have really gone to town on the packaging, and the new packaging is absolutely exquisite. It's, you know, looks after your train, but also gives you a feeling of an event when you open it, if that's the right word to use. I opened this and I'm completely underwhelmed. I was like, what on earth are you thinking putting this kind of packaging on? So I complained to Hornby. This was one of my complaints when I sent the model back. And of course their response was, well, this is environmentally friendly packaging, and, you know, this is good for the environment. When this gets thrown away, you know, it doesn't, it composts and all the other things. And I just sat there thinking to myself, this is ridiculous. When you buy a £600 train, very, very, very few people are going to throw away the box. So actually, by making the box out of recycled materials, it doesn't matter what those recycled materials are, whether they're plastics or, you know, you're actually capturing, you know, things from going in the ground. So by using, you know, different types of foam or recycled foams or anything along those lines, you're capturing it, because it's going to stay with this train for many, many, many years. This cardboard here, I bet you hardly any of these have been thrown away, and it's just not given the product the gravitas that it should have done. So thankfully Hornby have changed their ways. The recent releases I've had, absolutely wonderful boxes, you know, really thick, sturdy boxes. You lift the lid off and there's bits of foam inside, and then when you open the blister pack, you know, it's all presented to you. Really nice. But this one I felt was particularly underwhelming, and yeah, hopefully you can see why. I put it on the track. Half the lights weren't working, and there's a wire hanging off, and yeah, all in all, it just felt completely wrong. There was these little connectors that joined the carriages together that were so tiny, so fragile, they were just going to get broken. And in the end, after running it around the track for a few times and having lots of issues with it running, I sent the train back. Never done that before. So I did get a refund for it, and I did write to them and told them where I thought the issues were with the train, and I did get a very blunt response back, which I was surprised at. And it stopped me buying locos, to be honest, from Hornby for probably about a year. I was really taken back with their response to you know, my concerns and worries over the model and why I was returning it. But yeah, I've got past that now. So jumping forward a couple of years from 2020, we go to 2022, and the APT has given a slight refresh. And what surprised me is a lot of the changes in the 2022 version were the things that I had sort of complained, if you like, about in my note to Hornby. So I'd had some running issues. I'd got a lot of wheel slip and it kept derailing. And basically in the 2022 version, they've increased the weight of the motor car to improve traction and improved the pivots of the motors so that it can go around the corners a little bit better. We've got in here redesign of the cab windows, and we've now got a driver inside the cab, so this all looks a lot cleaner, a lot neater than it did. Modifications to the pantograph, so you can see this here, really lovely detailed pantograph on these models. I'd pointed out that in the 2020 version I could see a big capacitor inside the carriage. That's now been moved, so you can no longer see that. And the couplings that I was very concerned about, they've moved to magnetic couplings, as you can see here. So a lot of things that I'd complained about back in 2020 had been fixed in this refresh for 2022. And when I saw a deal come up on the APT, I went ahead and bought a set. So I've only got the 5-car set now. I didn't go for the full 7-car. Still cost me a lot of money, but I'm actually quite pleased with it. There is some lovely detail on here, which we'll go through in a minute. The other couple of things on here that I've noticed is when this is on the track, the capacitor inside is now working really well, in the fact that when you lift it off the track, the lights will stay on for probably, I don't know, 20-30 seconds. Which means when you're running on analog, when you pull this train into a station, all the lights stay on in the train for 20-30 seconds, which is a fantastic thing. And I'm sure that's what the original 2020 version was supposed to do, but mine, I don't believe mine did that. So that's been fixed on this 2022 version. There's also now a 21-pin decoder socket, and it's also HM7000 compatible. I'm leaving mine running in analog. I'm quite pleased with that. Obviously, if you want to switch it over to digital, I don't know whether you need 2 chips on this one. I've not researched that, but something to check, because I've noticed here you've got access panel underneath the leading car, so there would be one on the trailing car, but there's also an access panel on the main driving car as well. So I'm assuming that if you want to operate all the lights and things, you may need more chips than you kind of expect, I think. Now, price-wise, I told you earlier that the train set had a retail price of £67.95 back in 1980. Well, in 1981, the train pack had a retail price of £52.75, which in today's money is £194. Now, right, this is the 2022 version. So first of all, we'll just make the train go away, and you see the red lights on the tail, and then coming back towards us, the white lights. All of the interior lights are on, and look how smooth it is. Absolutely no problems with traction going uphill or downhill, as you expect with all wheels driven, and almost double the weight in the driving car. Let's just send it round the track. It's going to come round to the troublesome area. I shouldn't think there'll be a problem. No, perfect. Now if I just stop it here, you can see that the interior lights have stayed on. If I go forward, it's clearer with the red, I think. Now, as the capacitor discharges, you'll see them gradually go off. But the longer you leave it running, the more sort of energy builds up in the capacitor. And yeah, indeed, when you stop in the station, you can get a good 20-30 seconds. Really does look and sound the part. So pleased with it. Well, let's compare these two locos. So I'm going to compare the loco from the 1980s with a loco from 2022. And just a reminder on the prices. So In 1982, the 5-car train pack would cost you £52.75, which adjusted for inflation is £194, let's call it 200, whereas the new train pack, £477. So I think earlier I said it's similar sort of prices, but actually it's double. So you're paying twice as much in real terms for the newer APT. Now, a few weeks ago, I did a review on the Intercity 125, and the headline was, sorry Hornby, I can't spend £400 on a loco. And then the content in the video was sort of saying, well, what can you actually do to the model to put that kind of value into it? So this is a great example. So we're going to go around the APT here and actually have a look at what the differences are and how the more recent one has actually doubled in price. Is there enough content on there, enough detail on there to warrant the cost increase? So let's start with the most obvious thing, which is the colour. So this version, first released in 2020, Hornby were at pains to stress that they'd gone to long lengths to ensure that the colour match was absolutely correct. And as you can see, putting them side by side, there is a clear difference there, obviously, with the older grey and now with this sort of cream colour on the side here. This does actually match the one that's in Crewe, so yeah, fair play, they've got the paint correct. The front of the cab, the actual detailing on the cab, profiling is very slightly different on the newer version. I'm sure it's through laser scanning and a lot more accuracy, got a lot more detail in there. And then in terms of the actual cab inside, I mean, this one, there's very little to show there. There's a blacked out window. I mean, there is a cab in there, but it's so tinted you can barely see into the cab. Whereas this one, we've got a nice detailed cab in there, a few bits and pieces picked out, which is good. And with this 2022 version, we've actually got a driver been put into the cab as well. So yeah, a little bit more detail in there, which is rather nice. We've got a moulded in wiper on the 1980s version, whereas it's separately fitted on the 2022. And then just looking straight on at the front, a similar sort of light configuration, obviously the more modern one having LEDs, and we've got a couple of little points picked out in the moulding and a line underneath the window, so it's a little bit clearer than the 1980s version, but not a great deal in it, to be fair. So moving around to the side windows, obviously the newer version's got a much nicer window in there, and the glass is recessed back just a little bit, so obviously not a clear body on this one, I don't believe. I think the glass is just manufacturing techniques have got a little bit better, and the glass is just fitted better on the newer version. Whereas, as I mentioned before, this glass, I think actually the cab glass on here looks like they've been fitted, whereas these are moulded into the body, so maybe this is actually fitted just on the side windows there. Now in terms of the door, we've got a sort of token moulding of the door on here. It's much more developed on the newer version. We've got some different labelling been printed onto the cab here and here, and a door handle picked out. I guess that's moulded in, but it has been picked out. Same features on the door on both models. Now just behind the cab, the louvers on both models quite clearly defined. I think the 1980s one probably a little bit less because it's been painted on, lines have been painted onto the clear plastic, so you can actually see through into the interior through these louvers, whereas these are quite clearly moulded in. Printing on the side, absolutely superb, no problem with that on either model. The louvers down the bottom here, probably a little bit better defined, to be honest, on the 1980s model, but then you'd argue that probably they're to scale, these are a little bit oversized, whereas these a lot more subtle and just printed in the side. Now it wouldn't have hurt to have a little bit of printing on here, picking out some of these features. That could have easily been done. We've got a little bit of printing at the back here, and yeah, the window, you see the rear window is picked out very differently between the two. In terms of the roof, a lot more detail on the more recent one. We've got the air vent on the top here. We've got a hatch that's moulded in, and we've also got the I don't know what you call these, the lines along the roof, and perfectly smooth moulding on the 1980s one, and an injection point right in the middle of the roof, which is not particularly good. Turning the models round to look at the end, so 1980s version, just a moulded in door, no features picked out, whereas on the more recent one, we've obviously got the printing on here, we've got the corridor making the joint between the two coaches, and there's some detailing inside that just picks out the back of the seats in there. Interior wise, there's not a great deal to choose between the two. The seats are just moulded in plastic, and you can see them in both vehicles. The newer version from Hornby has a capacitor in there, so when it stops at a station, the lights will remain on. In terms of the bogies, I've also mentioned earlier in the video the little ramp feature that allows the tilt mechanism to tilt as it goes around the corner. The same mechanism is used on both variants, so it's a little bit more subtle on the 2022 version. And in terms of the electrical pickups, we've got a single pickup left and right on the 1980s version, whereas a double pickup, so two-wheel pickup on the left, two-wheel pickup on the right on this newer version, makes it a lot more robust in keeping the electricity running into the train. And just to say, the two pickups on the 1980s versions, these only control the lights on the front here. There's no internal lights at all in the carriage. So when your train is going around, unless you put lights in there, you didn't have any illumination inside the carriage, purely on the front here in the 1980s. Whereas I say this one, you've got complete illumination and the capacitor, so that when you stop in the station, the lights do remain on. Now, one thing I will say, and you'll see it later when I'm actually running the train, these lights on the front here are flickering. So basically the interior lights have all been put on the capacitor. For some unknown reason, these two lights on the front from the 2022 version, they're not on the capacitor. So basically when it's losing any sort of pickup or any continuity from the current, these lights are flickering, which is really annoying, because it wouldn't have taken a lot to put that all on one circuit and keep the lights on as the train's going around the track. So it could be that in the real loco, when this pulls into a station, these lights do go out. Obviously they change to red depending on the direction of running, and if they put it on the capacitor, these would have been on all the time. Maybe that's the reason, but for me, watching it go around the track with it flickering, it either needed a separate capacitor or it needed to be included in the circuit on the other windows. The moulding for the actual wheels look very, very similar. I mean, it is a different moulding. This is clearly, a new moulding. There are different features on it, and there are some bits and pieces picked out with paint. But yeah, very similar moulding. And the other thing to note is the size of the wheels. The one from the 1980s, the wheels are much bigger, and these are much smaller. So obviously a much more accurate model in the 2020s. But at the moment, I'm struggling to see where the extra cost has gone into manufacturing this, because the features on it, although they are without a doubt much better, they're not a massive step ahead, if you see what I mean, than the one that was in the 80s. The 80s one still had lights on it, it still had some form of cab, it still had an interior. What else could you do to this to make it more expensive? Maybe some moving fans inside, I don't know. Moving on to the rear bogie, we can see on the 1980s one, you had half of the bogie on the coach and half of it on the trailing coach, and these two would clip together with the clips. We'll show you that in a moment. Whereas on the later one, we've got a complete bogie here, and the second coach sits on this little peg and balances out the whole system. Again, the moulding's very, very similar. There's a lot more refined moulding on the latter model. This is a little bit crude, but again, they've captured some of the detail in both. Got a little bit of printing again on there as well. Right, put those to one side and let's talk about the next coach. Right, so moving on to the TBF coaches, a very, very similar story, to be fair. You obviously can see the colour difference on the roof. We've got the marking lines moulded in, whereas this is just, again, another flat, smooth roof, again with an ejection point in the middle. In terms of the bogies, now I mentioned the coupling before. So in the 1980s, you'd bring the two together. Let me just move my pencil out of the way. Bring the two together and they would clip in like so. And with the more modern version, we've now got this fixing. There's a hole in the bottom here, and again you can see the ramp quite clearly there that I've spoken about before. And this just drops into there and makes your coupling between the two. In terms of how close the coaches are coupled together, so in terms of the closeness of running of the coaches, there's not a great deal in it. They're both very close together. Again, just pointing out the wheel sizes. These wheels are much smaller, much bigger on the 1980 version. Now, in terms of the other end of the train, this one from the 1980s, you can see this little clip here that would clip onto the driving car, and the more modern one from 2022, has got magnetic couplings. Now the one that I did buy in 2020 that I mentioned had a very similar clip to this, but it was a little bit more refined and it was very, very flimsy. Yeah, I just felt that didn't have any robustness in it at all. In terms of the finish on the side of the coaches, I mean, it's quite evident that obviously the windows are a different size, so there's obviously been a bit of scanning going there. This was been put in as a window where it was louvered before, and again, the louvers on here, they've been painted onto the clear plastic body, so I can see through them. But the other thing to note in the 1980s, look at the finish here. There's a big crack running all the way down the loco here, where the two parts of the body join together, and obviously there's a mismatch in the moulding. None of that in the latter version, so Hornby have done a really nice job on this. In terms of the printing, we've got some extra printing on the 2022 version, just here and around the vehicle. But on the 1980s version, got a little yellow hint along the top there. Again, the same story with the mouldings on the lower parts of the wagons. So looking at the ends here, we've got two moulded indoors. You can see on the corridor part here, nicely fitted silver surround. This is on the 2022 version with a couple of printed features. Very similar moulding, and obviously this door would be locked. You couldn't go through into the power car. On the other end, where we're joining the two coaches together, we've got just on the 1980s one, just a moulded indoor, but again, this open walk-through on the 2022 version, and you can see some of the moulding of the seats inside. Now the seats on this Intamin coach are moulded in a different colour on the 22 version, so we've got a sort of burgundy colour. I don't know if that's showing out on the camera, hopefully it is. And then on the coach, we've got a kind of dark blue colour. Again, two pickups on the trailer, putting the lights on with a capacitor in there, keeping them on, you know, when it stops in a station. And then on the 1980s, very similar sort of moulding, but again, they've changed the colour. So 1980s, we had sort of a pinkish colour on the seats, and then the coach had this sort of light blue colour running through here again. Right, onto the power cars, and I think this is where I'm going to eat my words with the where the money has been spent and where the value has been put into the newer model. So underneath on the newer model, all of the wheels are driven. Every single one of them has got drive to it. I can see a universal joint and a drive shaft, so I'm guessing a centrally mounted motor. I believe it's 5-pole skew wound, and it does have a double flywheel on there, so a lot more tractive power, motive power if you like, than back in the 1980s, where we had a single ring-filled motor at one end of the carriage. It was woefully inadequate. Really struggles to pull the train round, as you'll see when we run the video later. I mean, obviously this is a 40-year-old loco. It probably did a lot better job when it was brand new, but these were never the most robust, were they, the ring-filled motors? And indeed, in one of my other APTs, there's a video on the channel where I've taken this out and put one of the CD motors inside to get rid of the old ring-filled, and made a vast improvement. Now down the side of the car, there's not really much to talk about. I mean, the colours obviously is different, and we've mentioned that before. We've got a little bit of printing here and there, and the handrails on the doors here have been picked out in chrome. Now the handrails were moulded in before, you can see them here, and the moulding is just a little bit better finished. You can see where the two halves come together on the 1980s version. There is a gap that's not pronounced at all on the latter version. Looking at the roof, obviously a much more detailed pantograph. If I bring back into shot this one, this is from the 1980s, and we've now got this wonderful little mechanism at the end here. I'm not going to disturb it in case I can't get it to latch back down, but I'll bring it up to the camera. There's really nice detail on there, and yeah, very, very fragile but nice detail, but also still rotates with the bogie underneath. In terms of the detailing on the roof, quite similar between the models, to be fair, just a little bit better executed on the later model. You can see these are just picked out a little bit better, and the grille is a little bit better moulded in, but otherwise most of the features are captured on both the 1980s one and the 2020 version. Still got the same skylights running through. Obviously these are a little bit different size, so clearly the scanning, they've probably been measured. On the end of the cab, we've got the moulded in door here, but with a window in there, and in the 1980s one, just a straightforward moulded in door, and a similar on the other end, exactly the same, and the 1980s one, just bring that up side by side. And the couplings, let's talk about the couplings. So in the 1980s, as I mentioned, we got this sort of clip fix that joins this to the adjacent carriages. And here's the magnetic coupling, the other side of magnetic coupling on this later version. And I'm just going to reiterate, the 2020 variant of this didn't come with the magnetic couplings. It came with some sort of clip-in affair that was I felt was very, very fragile. And just before I mention the weight of the loco, I'm just going to point out on the side here, it says City of Derby. That's not represented on this latter version. Just says Intercity ATP on the side, much the same as that side. And yeah, the printing on it, still, both are very, very good. Now, the final thing to say about these is the weight. This is extremely heavy. I'll go and get some scales in a second. But again, this has got no weight to it at all. I have trialled on my other version of ATP, actually putting more weight in here. Now, it works better with the CD motor, but with the Ringfield, you know, you'd put some weight in here and then the Ringfield can't manage, it hasn't got enough power to move the train at any speed. And especially when it gets to a corner, the whole thing sort of grinds to a halt. So, yeah, there has been a vast improvement in the traction and motive power between the two models. Right, let me just get a set of scales. I'll start by weighing the version from the 1980s. A grand total of 243 grams. And now the more recent version, 455 grams. So double the weight, double the amount of driving wheels, and yeah, more than likely double or triple the power from the motor. Now I'm beginning to see in real terms why this newer loco is costing twice the price of the one from the 1980s. I mean, there's so much been put into this power car in terms of the drivetrain and the technology inside. And of course, to mention the lighting in the carriages and the capacitors, and also the fact that this is now wired up ready to accept the HM7000 chip as well. So obviously a lot of investment gone in there, and that's why it's pushed the price up on this one. So I can kind of understand why a 5-car set of the APT is costing £477. I still can't justify in my mind why an Intercity 125, which is just a lead car and a dummy car, is also costing the same price when you've got the full train here for that value. But that's for another day and another conversation. Well, as promised at the beginning of the video, I've got a few bits of souvenirs that I've picked up over the years. So this here, we've got a little sleeve here. You can see APT, Train of the Future is now in service. And inside is a ticket. And whilst it does say across here, souvenir, it is a ticket for the Intercity ATP, as you can see. It's dated the 7th of December 1981 from Glasgow. And over here, telling of a different world. Facing back, first class smoker. And yeah, so that's in there. And then in the book here, it gives some information about the introduction of it, what's this, passenger facilities, seat reservations and tickets. And under high speed, it says, initially whilst in regular passenger service, the APT will run at a maximum speed of 125 miles an hour. But on a test run on the 20th of December 1979, it achieved a new British speed record of 160 miles an hour. These high speeds can be maintained because of the unique tilting mechanism, which means that full passenger comfort is still effective when the curves are negotiated at up to 40% faster than conventional locomotive-hauled trains. And it says under special design features, considerable weight savings have been effected by using articulated coaches of aluminium construction. And it says here, under the future, British Rail hopes to build a fleet of APTs for the main electrified intercity services from Euston to Glasgow, Liverpool, Manchester, northwest of England and the West Midlands. if the government gives the authority, these services could be running by the late 1980s. So yeah, that's the ticket. To go with the ticket was a souvenir certificate, again dated the 7th of December 1981. I don't know whether these were actually printed for a special train, or whether these are just, you know, something out of a magazine, but I think they're of interest. And then finally, the British Railways tie with APT, as you can see, woven into the design. Well, I've been filming this video probably for the best part of 10 days, maybe a little bit longer, you know, with all the preparation and then filming all the little parts of it. And I finally finished editing it together last night, and I sat down to watch some telly and put on YouTube, and there's Sam's Trains. So Sam from Sam's Trains has also done a review on the APT and put it live yesterday. Really, really good review. Go and have a look at it. It's fantastic. Now, thankfully, he's gone with a slightly different angle to what I've gone with. You know, I've compared more of the 1980s with the model from the 2020s, whereas he's reviewing the model from the 2020s. He has gone with a 5-car set, exactly the same as I had. But towards the end of the video, he started posing the question, with a single power car, is that capable of driving a, let's say, a 7-car train or a 9-car train, where, you know, you're pushing 3 cars or 4 cars in front of the power car? Is that going to be a problem? Well, it just so happens I have extra coaches, so we can answer that. So let me take this past slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and on the end there 9. You see, absolutely no problem at all, even with my bad track, making its way around absolutely perfectly, with no hesitation, no problems on the bends, lots of power. Let me just turn the lights out on the room. Obviously the gap in the middle is the power car. Now, I wasn't so sure about the blue seats and the red seats, but they really do set the train off in the dark, don't they? To get that different sort of orangey tint on the lead and trailing cars. Right, start slowing the train down. Beautiful smooth control, and I love the way these lights look on here. I mean, absolutely marvellous, isn't it? I think Hornby have done such a superb job with this APT. Yeah, wonderful model, so pleased with it. Well, let's wrap this video up. So, a few weeks ago I posed the question, £450 on an Intercity 125, what can you possibly do to the train to make it worth that kind of money? Now, this train pack, obviously still around that sort of price, and you can pick up the APTs from the 1980s for around about, I suppose, about £100, £150 will get you a decent set. So there is a big price difference between the new one and the old one. So in terms of the detail around on the body, I'm still struggling to see how you could add the kind of detail, the kind of additional features to this type of loco to increase the price point. All of the detail is refined. It's exquisite in the way that you know, the windows are fitted, and the fit and finish in it is far superior to the one in the 1980s. But all of the features generally are captured on the one in the 1980s. Things like the door handles and things like the window surrounds, they're all there, and the window wipers and things. So you're not actually adding anything to the train, you've just refined what's there. And it's, don't get me wrong, it's been refined in such a way that you know, it is a beautiful looking model, and you can see them next to each other here. You know, you can see the different shape in the nose of the AP, you can see the different colour, you can see the windows, how they're finished. Much better quality model. Now let's come on to the running. So the 1980s one is an absolute pain to run. Now, agreed, I didn't put any friction tyres on there. You can get the ring filled motors to work a lot better than I've got here, but they're so weak in the power. When the carriages get to the corner, the whole thing just slows down. So you're probably going to end up putting 2 ring-filled motors either end of the power unit on the 1980s version to make it any good, any use. We move on to the 2020s version, and the power car is amazing. I mean, as I say, all the wheels are driven. Central motor, I can see the drive shafts and universal joints in there, and the fact that it rotates on the top with the pantograph, absolutely fantastic. And the weight in it, with it being almost double what the 1980s had, you've just seen it take a nine car train round the track, not skipping a beat and still retaining that smooth motion. So yeah, an absolutely wonderful model, and that's clearly where the price difference is between these two. So I mentioned before that you know, adjusted for inflation, the 5-car pack back in the 80s was just shy of £200. This pack with the 5-car, they're selling for £477, so you're talking about £250 more difference. Is there £250 more in the new version? I'm not totally sure. I mean, certainly there is a definite increase in value. You've got the HM7000, you've got the lighting, you've got the capacitors, you've got the power car, and then you've got all the new tooling and the detail. So, you know, I'll leave it open to debate, but quite an expensive model. And I was very lucky to pick up my 2020s APT in a sale recently, and yeah, I didn't pay the full £477, so that enabled me to splash out on a couple of coaches. Anyway, I hope that was of interest, and yeah, if you have enjoyed the video, please do give it a thumbs up, and please check out the channel. There's lots of videos on there, including changing the motor over to a CD motor in my other APT. And if you can subscribe, you'd be doing me a really big favour. It does help me out, gives me encouragement to do more, and also helps the channel out with the YouTube algorithm. And with that, we'll leave this one there. I'll say thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.